17 years after I found an 8-year-old girl selling wilted flowers outside a Walmart, her billionaire biological mother handed her the keys to a silver Ferrari and said, "You've proven you're worthy of coming home." My daughter took the keys. Then she looked straight at me. I wish I could tell you I understood what was happening in that moment. I didn't. I stood near the back of the University of Cincinnati's engineering pavilion, holding a white envelope with $300 inside. My graduation gift. The most I could manage without dipping into the money I kept aside for property taxes. The suit I wore had been hanging in my closet since my retirement dinner. I'd lost 12 pounds since then, so the shoulders sagged and the pants felt loose around my waist. My right knee was throbbing from the walk across campus, and my good dress shoes had started pinching my toes before the ceremony even began. None of that had bothered me until I saw the car parked outside. It was low, silver, and polished bright enough to catch the afternoon sun. A thin red ribbon ran across the hood. People were already holding up their phones. Then there was the woman standing beside my daughter. Victoria Langford. Even if you didn't follow business news, you knew the name. Langford Medical Systems had its logo on hospitals all over Ohio. Victoria had the kind of calm, expensive appearance that made everyone else straighten their backs without realizing it. She held out the leather key case. Emily accepted it. And for one ugly second, I looked down at the envelope in my hand and felt ashamed of it. That's where this story ended up. But it started 17 years earlier on a bitter November night outside a Walmart on Wilmington Pike in Dayton. I was 46 then and still delivering mail for the Postal Service. That particular day, one of the younger carriers had called in sick, so I'd covered part of his route after finishing mine. By the time I clocked out, it was nearly 8, and freezing rain had started tapping against the windshield of my Ford. I stopped at Walmart for coffee, pain reliever, and a frozen dinner. That was when I saw her. A small girl stood near the cart return, beneath a weak yellow light. Her gray sweatshirt was too thin for the weather, and the cuffs covered half her hands. She held 5 flowers wrapped in damp newspaper. They weren't store-bought flowers. They looked like something pulled from a neglected yard. Bent stems, torn leaves, pink petals turning brown around the edges. She stepped toward a man pushing a cart. "Would you like a flower, sir? Just $1." He walked past without looking at her. She didn't complain. She just returned to the edge of the sidewalk and waited. I watched 2 more people ignore her before I got out of my truck. "You got a permit for this flower business?" I asked. Her eyes widened. She looked ready to run. I raised both hands. "Easy, I'm kidding." She studied me carefully. "Do you want one?" "How much for all of them?" $5. I handed her a 10. She counted the flowers twice, then held them out. "I don't have change." "Keep it." Her face tightened. "I'm not begging," she said. "I didn't say you were." "You gave me too much." "Then consider it a bulk order." That earned the smallest twitch at the corner of her mouth. Up close, I could see how cold she was. Her lips had gone pale, and rainwater dripped from her hair onto the shoulders of her sweatshirt. "When did you last eat?" I asked. "I ate." "What?" She glanced toward the parking lot. "Food." That clears it right up. She looked away. There was a McDonald's inside the store back then. I told her I was getting coffee and asked whether she wanted something warm. She refused twice. On the 3rd try, I told her she could pay for her own meal with the flower money if that made her feel better. She followed me inside but stayed several steps behind. She ordered 6 chicken nuggets, small fries, and hot chocolate. When the food came, she ate slowly, like someone trying not to attract attention. Halfway through, I saw her wrap 2 nuggets in a napkin and slide them into her sweatshirt pocket. "You saving those?" I asked. "For tomorrow." That was the moment something in my chest shifted. "What's your name?" She hesitated. "Emily." "I'm Thomas." She nodded but didn't offer a last name. I asked where her parents were. Her shoulders stiffened. "I'm fine." An 8-year-old selling flowers outside Walmart at night usually isn't fine. "I'm 9. She wasn't. I learned that later. I stepped away from the table and called the police. Quietly, I thought. Not quietly enough. When I turned back, the chair was empty. I spotted her running through the automatic doors. "Emily!" By the time I reached the parking lot, my knee was already barking. She made it past 2 rows of cars before slipping on the wet pavement. She scrambled up before I could get close. "Stay away from me!" I stopped. Rain ran down my forehead and into my eyes. "I'm not taking you anywhere," I said. "You called them." "Yes." "I'm not going back." "Back where?" She wrapped both arms around herself and said nothing. I stayed about 15 feet away. "I'm not going to grab you," I told her, "but I'm not leaving you out here either." 2 patrol cars arrived 10 minutes later. A county social worker came almost an hour after that. That was how I met Margaret Sloan, a tired woman in a brown coat who looked like she hadn't slept properly since the Reagan administration. She knelt beside Emily and spoke gently. Emily refused to answer. Margaret finally pulled me aside. "She ran from a foster placement yesterday," she said. "Why?" "We're still sorting that out. She said she's not going back." Margaret glanced toward the girl. There was an older boy in the home. He'd been taking her food and threatening her. The foster parents didn't catch it soon enough. "Where's her family?" "Mother abandoned her with an acquaintance several years ago. The acquaintance couldn't keep her. We haven't been able to locate the mother." I looked at Emily sitting in the back of the patrol car, still holding the paper bag with her leftover nuggets. "What happens now?" Margaret gave me a weary look. "Tonight, emergency placement. Tomorrow, paperwork." I didn't bring Emily home that night. Real life doesn't work the way it does in movies. You don't find a frightened child in a parking lot and simply decide she belongs to you. But the next morning I called Margaret. Then I called again 3 days later. In the following week, after Emily was moved to another temporary home, I asked if I could visit. Margaret said no at first. Then she explained what it would take for a single widower with no children to become a licensed foster parent. Background checks, home inspections, training sessions, financial reviews, interviews that sometimes felt more like interrogations. I signed up anyway. It took 7 months before Emily crossed the doorway of my little house in Belmont, carrying everything she owned in one black trash bag. She stood in the living room and looked around. "How long am I staying?" she asked. "As long as they let you." She didn't like that answer. For the first few weeks, she hid crackers under her mattress. She slept with her shoes beside the bed. Every morning, she packed her few belongings before school because she expected someone to move her again. One evening, she knocked a drinking glass off the kitchen counter. It shattered. Emily froze. Her hands went stiff at her sides. Her face lost all color. She looked at me the way a person looks at an approaching storm. I picked up the broom. "It's a glass, kiddo," I said. "We've got more." She stared at me. "That's it?" "What else would there be?" Her chin began trembling. Then she sat on the kitchen floor and cried so hard she could barely breathe. Nearly 2 years later, a judge finalized the adoption. Outside the courtroom, Emily held my hand and asked, "Does this mean they can't send me somewhere else?" "Not unless you plan on putting me in a nursing home someday." She laughed and called me Dad for the first time. Back then, I believed her biological mother had disappeared without knowing what became of her. I was wrong. Victoria Langford knew where Emily lived. She knew where she went to school. She even knew about the nights I worked overtime because we couldn't cover her medical bills. For 17 years, that woman watched from a distance. And she never once came to the door. The first year Emily lived with me, she didn't trust anything that couldn't fit inside a backpack. Food, clothes, school supplies, even people. Especially people. It took time before she stopped asking whether she was still staying every Sunday night. For a while, I thought the adoption papers would fix that. They didn't. A judge could change her last name in one afternoon, but he couldn't erase years of being moved from one house to another. So I learned not to make big speeches. I just kept showing up. When she was 10, I bought her a used Schwinn bicycle at a garage sale on Patterson Road. It was purple under 3 layers of chipped paint, and the front brake barely worked. Emily stood beside it in our driveway. "You bought that?" "For $12. "You got robbed." "I prefer to think I made an investment." "In tetanus." I laughed. "Get the sandpaper." We spent 2 Saturdays taking it apart and repainting it blue. The first time she tried riding without training wheels, she made it halfway down the sidewalk before tipping into Mrs. Callahan's hedge. I hurried toward her. "Don't touch it," she snapped. "I was going to help." "I can do it." She dragged the bike upright, climbed back on, and tried again with blood running down one shin. That was Emily. She would accept a Band-Aid eventually, but only after proving she could survive the cut by herself. At 14, she got suspended for punching a boy in the cafeteria. The assistant principal called me at work. When I arrived, Emily sat in the office with her arms folded and a red mark across one knuckle. The boy had called her a charity case after hearing she was adopted. I wanted to tell her I understood. Instead, I said, "You're apologizing." Her head snapped toward me. "He started it. He used his mouth. You used your fist. So I'm supposed to let people say whatever they want?" "No. You walk away, report it, or answer with words. You don't get to hit people because they found the one thing that hurts." She didn't speak to me during the drive home. I stopped at Bob Evans anyway. She stared at the restaurant sign. "I thought I was grounded." "You are. Grounded people still need lunch." Over apple pie, I said, "You don't have to be ashamed of where you came from, but you don't get to use it as permission to become cruel." She pushed her fork through the crust. "I hate when you sound reasonable." "Most teenagers do." She apologized to the boy the next morning. She didn't mean every word, but she said them. By high school, Emily had turned into the kind of student teachers remembered. Not because she raised her hand the most, but because she stayed after class to ask how something worked. She was good at math, better than I had ever been. When she took algebra, I spent 3 nights at the kitchen table relearning equations so I could help her. I watched online videos, filled half a legal pad with notes, and still got one problem wrong. Emily leaned over my shoulder. "You switched the signs. I was testing you. You wrote 'I hate variables' in the margin. That was also part of the test." She laughed so hard milk came out of her nose. Those were the years I remember most clearly. Not birthdays or report cards, Tuesday nights at the kitchen table, burned grilled cheese, arguing over whether she was old enough to stay out past 10. Ordinary things. That's how a home gets built. Not all at once, piece by piece, when nobody is watching. When Emily was accepted into the University of Cincinnati's biomedical engineering program, she ran into the kitchen holding the letter. I got in. I looked up from a stack of mail. "You sure?" She slapped the envelope against my chest. "Read it." The scholarship covered tuition, but not everything else. There was housing, meal plans, books, insurance, lab fees, and a dozen charges universities somehow forgot to mention in the brochures. I told her we would figure it out. She told me not to do anything stupid. So naturally, I sold my fishing boat. It wasn't much. A 19-foot aluminum boat with a faded green stripe and an outboard motor that needed prayer on cold mornings. My late wife and I used to take it to Indian Lake before she got sick. After she died, I kept it in the side yard under a blue tarp. I only took it out twice a year, but seeing it there made me feel like part of my old life was still waiting. A man from Springfield bought it for $4,800. I stood in the driveway as he hitched it to his truck. When he pulled away, the tires left 2 pale tracks in the grass. Emily came home that weekend and noticed immediately. "Where's the boat?" "Sold it." Her face changed. "Why?" "It was sitting there." Dad." "The motor was going." "Dad?" I sighed. "You needed the housing deposit." She put her backpack down hard. "I told you not to do that." "It was my boat." "It was Mom's too." That stopped me. She rarely mentioned my wife that way. She had never met her, but she knew every story. "I know," I said. "You don't have to keep giving things up for me. I'm not giving up my life." "That's what it looks like." I took a breath. "You're not taking anything from me, Emily. I'm choosing where to put it." She looked away and wiped her cheek with the heel of her hand. "One day," she said, "I'm buying you another boat. I'll settle for you paying your phone bill on time." She threw a dish towel at me. College changed both of us. Emily became more independent, which was exactly what I wanted and somehow harder than I expected. She stopped calling every night. She made decisions without asking me. Sometimes I found out about important things after they had already happened. At the same time, my body started reminding me I wasn't 46 anymore. My right knee had been bad for years, but then my lower back joined the complaint. 2 fingers on my left hand went numb after long drives. I started forgetting little things, where I left my glasses, whether I'd taken my blood pressure pill, why I had walked into the garage. Nothing serious, I told myself. Just age. I retired from the Postal Service earlier than planned after slipping on an icy porch during my route. The fall didn't break anything, but it finished what years of stairs and heavy mailbags had started. I didn't tell Emily how much pain I was in. She was working on her senior project, a mobility device designed to help older patients regain balance after surgery. The irony wasn't lost on me. One evening she called while I was heating canned soup. "Did you take your medication?" "Yes." "Which one?" "The pill-shaped one." "Dad." "I took it." There was a pause. "You sound tired." "I'm retired. Tired is in the job description." She didn't laugh. "You'd tell me if something was wrong, right?" "Of course." That answer came too quickly, and we both knew it. By graduation morning, I had convinced myself I was doing fine. I left Dayton at 5:30 in my 2005 Ford F-150, wearing the same Navy suit I'd worn to my retirement dinner. In the glove box was a white envelope with $300 and a handwritten note. "For whatever comes next." I parked farther from the engineering complex than I should have and walked slowly, pretending to admire the campus whenever my knee forced me to stop. When Emily crossed the stage, I stood before anyone else in my row. "That's my daughter," I told the woman beside me. She smiled. "I can tell." After the ceremony, graduates and their families moved to a reception at the engineering pavilion. A faculty member announced that a major donor would present a special award to Emily for her senior project. Then Victoria Langford entered. She wore a cream-colored suit and walked beside two assistants and a university dean. Outside, two black SUVs waited near the curb. I knew her name from television commercials and hospital wings. She stepped to the microphone and praised Emily's work. She spoke about innovation, discipline, and the importance of building a better future. Then her voice changed. "There is another reason this young woman matters to me." Emily went still. Victoria turned toward her. "I am her biological mother." Nobody cheered. For several seconds, the only sound was the air conditioning humming above us. I looked at Emily expecting shock, but she wasn't shocked. That frightened me more than the announcement. Victoria's assistant brought forward a small red leather box. Inside was a Ferrari key. Through the glass wall, I could see the silver car waiting outside with a ribbon across the hood. Victoria smiled at my daughter. "You've spent years proving what kind of woman you are," she said. "You've proven you're worthy of coming home." Emily reached out and took the key. My fingers closed around the cheap envelope in my pocket. Then Victoria handed her a cream-colored folder. "There's only one small formality," she said, "before we leave." Victoria held the cream-colored folder with both hands, as if she were presenting Emily with a diploma instead of paperwork. "This is simply to protect everyone's privacy," she said. "Nothing complicated." A man standing behind her opened a pen and offered it to Emily. That small gesture bothered me more than it should have. They had brought the pen. They had marked the pages. They had expected her to sign. Emily accepted the folder, but not the pen. "What exactly am I signing?" she asked. Victoria gave a patient smile. "A family reconciliation agreement. It allows us to move forward without outside interference." Outside interference? The media, lawyers, people who might try to exploit this. The way she said people made it sound like she had already sorted the entire room into useful and inconvenient. She turned toward the guests. "Emily will have every opportunity she should have had from the beginning." Then she began listing them. An apartment in Chicago near the Langford Medical System's headquarters, a position with the Family Foundation, access to the Langford estate in Lake Forest, a transition fund for travel, clothing, security, and whatever else Emily might need while adjusting to her new life. New life. Those two words landed harder than the rest. I looked around the pavilion. Faculty members stood near white tablecloths and trays of untouched sandwiches. Parents whispered to one another. Graduates held plastic cups of lemonade and stared. Outside the glass wall, the Ferrari sat under the afternoon sun like a polished promise. Emily opened the folder. Victoria kept speaking. "Of course, there is no pressure to change your name. That would be entirely your choice. But if you wanted to reconnect with the Langford family publicly, we would support that." My hand was still inside my jacket pocket, wrapped around the envelope I had brought. $300 for whatever comes next. At that moment, it felt almost insulting. I glanced down at my shoes. I had polished them the night before, but the leather was cracked near the toes. Across from me, one of Victoria's assistants wore shoes that probably cost more than my monthly pension check. I hated myself for noticing. Worse, I hated the thought that followed. Maybe this was what Emily deserved. Not the old Ford with a heater that worked only when it felt like it. Not my one-story house with the loose gutter and the bathroom door that never shut properly. Not a father who had started keeping a list on the refrigerator because his memory wasn't as dependable as it used to be. Maybe love meant stepping aside when someone could give your child more. Then another part of me rose up and wanted Emily to throw the keys straight through the glass wall. I wanted her to call Victoria a coward. I wanted her to point at me and say none of this mattered. But that was my hurt talking. The father in me knew something harder. If Emily wanted that life, I had to let her choose it without making her feel guilty for leaving me behind. I loosened my grip on the envelope. Emily turned one page, then another. "You've read this?" she asked Victoria. Of course. Every section? My legal team prepared it. That wasn't my question. The room grew quieter. Victoria's smile thinned. "Yes, I've reviewed it." Emily looked down again. I was too far away to read the pages, but I saw several yellow tabs along the edge. Signature lines, initial boxes. The man with the pen stepped closer. "You can take your time," he said, which was a strange thing to say while holding a pen inches from her hand. Emily pointed to one paragraph. "This says I agree that you made reasonable efforts to locate and support me." Victoria's expression didn't change. "That is standard language. Is it true?" "We never stopped caring about you." Emily lifted her eyes. "That's not what I asked." Victoria glanced briefly toward the dean, then back at Emily. "There were circumstances you don't understand." "Then help me understand." A few people lowered their phones. This had stopped feeling like a happy surprise. Victoria folded her hands. "I was very young. I was under enormous pressure from Daniel's family. They believed you were not his child. There were threats involving custody, finances, and my safety. I made the decision I believed gave you the best chance at stability." I felt my jaw tighten. Emily stayed calm. "How long have you known where I lived?" Victoria hesitated. "I always hoped you were safe." "How long?" "I received occasional updates." Emily nodded once. "Was that before or after my 11th birthday?" The question was too specific to be accidental. Victoria's eyes shifted toward one of her attorneys. That was the first moment I realized Emily had walked into this room knowing more than I did. She reached inside the pocket of her graduation gown and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "What is that?" Victoria asked. Emily opened it. A report from Whitcomb Investigations dated March 14th, 2012. The color left Victoria's face. Emily read from the page. "Subject resides with adoptive father Thomas Walker in Dayton, Ohio. Attends Horace Mann Elementary. No immediate safety concerns." My name sounded strange in her voice. She continued. "Mr. Walker has recently taken additional weekend shifts. Dental treatment for the child may be creating financial strain." My stomach turned. I remembered that year. Emily needed braces, and the insurance covered less than we expected. I picked up Sunday parcel work for nearly 4 months. I told her I wanted the overtime because I was bored. Somebody had been watching us. Someone had written it down. Victoria cleared her throat. "I hired professionals because I needed to know you were safe." Emily looked at her. "You knew I needed dental work. That is not the same as understanding the situation. You knew Dad was working extra shifts. I was advised not to interfere." "By who?" "My attorneys." Emily's voice stayed even. "Did they advise you not to send a birthday card?" Nobody moved. I wanted to step forward, but something stopped me. This was Emily's question. She had earned the right to ask it herself. Victoria lowered her voice. "I know this looks terrible." "It doesn't look terrible," Emily said. "It is terrible." One of the university staff members moved toward the microphone, probably hoping to end the scene. Emily raised one hand. "I'm almost finished." Then she turned slightly toward the audience. 3 weeks ago, I was contacted by an attorney named Claire Reynolds. A woman in the third row stood. She wore a dark blue suit and carried a plain leather folder. No assistance, no security. Victoria stared at her. You had no authority to contact Emily before the estate review was complete. Claire's expression remained neutral. I represent the independent trustee. We were legally required to notify her. Emily looked back at me. I must have looked completely lost because her face softened for half a second. Then she explained. Victoria's husband, Daniel Langford, had died 8 months earlier. His trust included all legally verified biological children. During the estate review, old records led the trustee to Emily. A DNA comparison with Daniel's brother confirmed the truth. Emily was Daniel Langford's biological daughter, and she was entitled to a substantial share of the family trust whether Victoria approved or not. She doesn't have to move in with you, Claire said. Victoria's attorney stepped forward. This is not the place for legal interpretation. Claire ignored him. She does not have to change her name. She does not have to join the foundation, and she does not have to sign away her right to speak honestly about her childhood. The folder in Emily's hands suddenly looked different. It wasn't a welcome home gift. It was a leash with expensive wrapping. I looked at Emily. You knew? I asked. She nodded. For 3 weeks. Why didn't you tell me? Her eyes met mine. Because I needed to know why she was coming back. The answer hurt more than I expected. Not because she had done anything wrong. Because she had carried all of this alone. Victoria took a step toward her. Emily, we can discuss this privately. You are being overwhelmed by people with their own agendas. Emily looked down at the Ferrari key in her palm. Then she closed her fingers around it. Thank you, she said. I'll accept the car. Victoria's shoulders relaxed. A smile returned to her face. Mine must have disappeared. Then Emily turned toward Claire. Now I'd like my attorney to explain what Mrs. Langford expected in return. Claire Reynolds walked to the front without hurrying. That was the first thing I noticed about her. Everyone else in the pavilion looked unsettled. Victoria's lawyer was whispering urgently to one of her assistants. The dean had both hands clasped in front of him, like he was trying to decide whether this had become a legal problem or a public relations disaster. Claire looked as calm as if she were approaching a bank counter. She stopped beside Emily. For the record, she said, I represent the independent trustee overseeing the estate of Daniel Langford. I do not represent Victoria Langford, Langford Medical Systems, or the university. Victoria's attorney stepped forward. This is a private family matter. Claire looked at him. Then it probably should not have been announced in front of 200 people. A few nervous laughs moved through the room. Even Emily glanced down to hide a smile. Claire opened her folder. Emily Walker has been legally verified as Daniel Langford's biological daughter. Under the terms of his trust, she is a beneficiary. That status does not depend on where she lives, what last name she uses, whether she accepts employment from the family, or whether she maintains a relationship with Mrs. Langford. Victoria lifted her chin. No one said otherwise. Claire turned one page. The agreement your legal team gave her says otherwise in several places. Her attorney shook his head. That is a gross mischaracterization. Then you won't mind if I explain it. He opened his mouth, but Victoria raised one hand. Let her speak. Her voice was controlled, but I could see the pulse beating quickly at the base of her throat. Claire held up the cream-colored folder Emily had been given. This document requires Emily to acknowledge that Mrs. Langford made reasonable efforts to locate and support her during childhood. Emily looked at Victoria. You didn't. Victoria's mouth tightened. Claire continued. It also prevents Emily from publicly discussing the circumstances of her abandonment, the investigation reports, or any financial hardship she experienced after entering foster care. A murmur spread through the room. It contains a broad release of claims, Claire said, including claims Emily may not yet know she has. And it gives a communications team selected by the Langford Family Authority to approve interviews, public statements, and written accounts involving her childhood. The university dean rubbed his forehead. Victoria looked toward the crowd. This is exactly why private matters should be handled privately. Language and legal agreements can sound harsh when taken out of context. Emily folded her arms. What context makes a lie true? Emily, please. No, you brought reporters. Victoria glanced toward the local news camera near the rear wall. They were already here for the university. You arranged for them to stay for the award. Victoria did not answer. Claire closed the folder. The independent trustee did not request this agreement. Emily's inheritance is not conditional upon signing it. The man who had offered Emily the pen quietly put it back in his pocket. Victoria's expression hardened. I was trying to protect her from a media circus. Emily looked around the room. You created one. That drew another brief, uncomfortable laugh. Victoria's eyes flashed, but she caught herself. Then she turned toward Emily with a softer voice. You know only pieces of what happened. I know you left me. I was 29 years old. Daniel's family believed you belonged to another man. They threatened to cut me off completely. They said they would destroy me in court and make sure I never saw you again. Then why didn't you fight? I was frightened. Emily nodded slowly. I can understand being frightened once. Victoria's face shifted. But you weren't frightened for one day, Emily continued. You had 17 years. The room went silent again. Victoria looked toward me as if she expected help. I almost laughed at that. Instead, I asked the question that had been sitting in my chest since Emily read the investigator's report. Did your lawyers tell you not to send her a birthday card? Victoria looked at me. For the first time that day, she seemed to really see me. Not as the gray-haired man standing near the wall, not as an obstacle, as the person who had been there while she watched from somewhere else. I was told contact could destabilize her placement, she said. For 17 years? She looked away. I wanted to tell her about the night Emily had her appendix removed and woke up asking whether I would still be there in the morning. I wanted to tell her about the time I worked Christmas Eve because I was short on the orthodontist bill. I wanted to hold up every sacrifice like a receipt. But then I saw Emily standing beside Claire. This wasn't my trial, and love wasn't a debt I needed to collect in public. So I stepped back. Emily noticed. She took a breath. You keep saying you watched because you cared, she said to Victoria, but watching isn't parenting. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. She pointed toward me. He didn't watch. He showed up. Victoria's eyes moved to me again. Emily continued. He sat beside me when I was sick. He learned algebra because I was too embarrassed to tell my teacher I didn't understand it. He worked weekends and told me he was bored. He sold the one thing he kept from his life with his wife so I could pay my housing deposit. My throat tightened. Emily, I said quietly. She shook her head. You never once told me I had to become successful to make any of that worth it. Then she faced Victoria. You didn't come back because I finally became your daughter. You came back because a DNA test made me valuable to your family. Victoria's eyes filled, but her voice stayed sharp. That is not fair. No, Emily said, it isn't. She opened her hand. The Ferrari key rested in her palm. For a moment, I thought she was going to give it back. Instead, she held it up. You said the car was mine with no conditions. Victoria hesitated. Yes. Good. I'm going to hold you to that. Confusion moved across Victoria's face. Emily looked toward Claire. Can we transfer it directly to the Miami Valley Foster Youth Alliance? Claire nodded. Once the title is completed, yes. Victoria stepped forward. What are you talking about? They'll auction it. The words landed harder than if Emily had thrown the key. The money can cover emergency housing, laptops, transportation, and college deposits for kids aging out of foster care. Victoria stared at her. You would give away a $250,000 car just to embarrass me? Emily's expression didn't change. This isn't about embarrassing you. She looked at the key one last time. It's for kids whose parents know where they are and still don't come. Nobody applauded at first. That made it feel more real. The room simply held the words. Then an older woman near the front began clapping. A professor joined her. A few graduates stood. Within seconds, most of the pavilion was on its feet. I barely heard them. I was watching Victoria. Her polished expression finally broke. You are destroying the only chance we have to become a family. Emily walked over and placed the unsigned agreement on the podium. No, she said. I'm refusing to let you pretend we already were one. Victoria left the pavilion before the applause stopped. Her attorney gathered the unsigned agreement. One assistant followed with the red leather box. The other stayed behind just long enough to tell Claire that any attempt to transfer the Ferrari would be reviewed carefully. Claire gave him her card. I'm sure it will. He took it without looking at it. Outside, the silver car still sat near the curb with the ribbon across its hood. A group of students had gathered around it, but nobody touched it. Emily and I walked past. She was still wearing her cap and gown. I was still carrying the white envelope in my pocket. Neither of us said anything until we reached the parking garage. The silence between us had changed. It wasn't the good kind, the easy quiet we had shared on long drives when she was younger. This one felt crowded. I unlocked the Ford. Emily pulled open the passenger door, then paused. You okay? I laughed once, but there wasn't much humor in it. I just found out a billionaire has been paying people to watch us for 17 years. I'm still deciding. She got in. I started the engine. The truck made its usual grinding complaint before turning over. For the first 10 minutes, we drove without speaking. Traffic crawled near campus. Graduates leaned out of car windows waving their caps. Horns honked. Families posed beside street signs. It should have felt like a celebration. Instead, I kept seeing Emily take that key. Finally, I said, "Why didn't you tell me?" She looked out the window. "I told you. I needed to know what she wanted." "That's not what I asked." She turned back toward me. "What did you want me to do? Call you the night Claire contacted me and say, 'Hey, Dad, the mother who abandoned me is a billionaire, her husband died, and I might inherit millions?'" "Yes." "You would have driven to Cincinnati before I finished the sentence." "Probably." "You would have tried to fix it." "I'm your father. And I'm 25. Her voice wasn't angry yet, but it was getting there. I tightened both hands on the wheel. "You carried this alone for 3 weeks." "I had Claire." "That's not the same." "No, it isn't. Claire doesn't panic." I looked at her. She closed her eyes. "That came out wrong." "No, it came out honest." We stopped at a red light. Emily took off her graduation cap and set it on the floor. "I was trying to protect you. I don't need protection from your life. You hide your pain medication from me." "That's different." "How?" "Because it is." She gave me a tired look. That was when the argument became real. "You still think everything hard belongs on your shoulders," she said, "even when nobody asks you to carry it." "That's what parents do." "No, that's what you do." The light turned green. The driver behind us tapped his horn. I pulled forward. "I saw you take that key," I said. Emily went quiet. "For a second, I thought you were going with her." Her head turned sharply. "You thought I'd leave with her?" I didn't know what to think. "After everything?" "It wasn't about trusting you." "It sounds exactly like that." I exhaled hard. "It was about me." She waited. I hated saying the next part out loud. "I'm 63. My knee barely made it across campus. I forget things. Half the time, you're the one reminding me to take my pills. Then this woman shows up with a Ferrari, apartments, money, connections, everything I couldn't give you." Emily stared at me. "I thought maybe you'd look at her life and realize you had settled for mine." She didn't answer right away. We passed the river, then merged onto Interstate 75. Finally, she said, "You're not competing with her." It didn't feel that way. "She's competing with 17 years she can't get back." I kept my eyes on the road. "And she's losing," Emily added, "because you were there." The anger went out of me, leaving something heavier. At a rest stop north of Hamilton, I pulled into a parking space. Emily looked at me. "What are we doing?" "My knee needs 5 minutes." That wasn't the whole truth. I reached into my jacket and handed her the envelope. She frowned. "What's this?" "Your graduation gift." "Dad!" "Open it." She slid her finger beneath the flap and pulled out the check. Then she unfolded the note. "For whatever comes next." Her mouth tightened. $300? I know it isn't much. She looked at me as if I had said something foolish. "This is the first thing anybody gave me today without asking for something back." I looked away. She reached across the console and took my hand. We sat there until my knee stopped hurting enough to drive. For about 2 days, I believed the worst was behind us. Then the video spread. A student had recorded Emily's speech and posted it online. By Monday morning, local television had picked it up. By Wednesday, national websites were running headlines about the foster child who rejected her billionaire mother. Some people praised Emily. Others called her ungrateful. A few claimed I had raised her to hate wealthy people. One man wrote that I had poisoned her against her real family. I read that sentence more times than I should have. Then Victoria released a statement saying she had attempted a private reconciliation and had been ambushed by people seeking financial advantage. Her lawyers challenged Emily's trust claim. They couldn't erase the DNA result, but they could slow everything down. They requested additional testing, questioned whether old adoption records had been properly handled, and demanded a review of every communication between Claire and Emily. The Ferrari stayed in legal limbo. Weeks became months. Emily attended meetings, gave blood samples, signed affidavits, and answered the same questions repeatedly. She had planned to start work at a medical device company in Columbus. Instead, she postponed her start date twice. I watched the strain settle into her face. One evening, I found her at my kitchen table surrounded by documents. "You can walk away," I said. She didn't look up. That's what she wants. "You don't need the money." "It isn't about needing it." She put down her pen. "If I walk away, she gets to decide that making this difficult is enough to erase me again." I understood then. Emily wasn't fighting for a fortune. She was fighting for the right not to disappear just because someone powerful found her inconvenient. Victoria had trouble of her own. An internal review found that Langford Medical Systems had paid some of the investigators who tracked Emily. The expenses had been labeled as risk management. Victoria stepped aside from daily operations while the board investigated. She didn't lose everything overnight. Real life rarely works that neatly. But for the first time, the control she had always depended on began slipping. 6 months after graduation, Claire called while Emily and I were eating chili at my kitchen table. "The trustee has approved the claim," she said through the speakerphone. "Fully." Emily closed her eyes. I reached for her hand. "There's one more thing," Claire added. "Victoria has requested a private meeting before the final documents are signed." Emily opened her eyes again. "With lawyers?" "No." "Public relations people?" "No." Claire paused. "She says she wants to come alone." 6 months earlier, I would have laughed if someone told me Victoria Langford wanted to meet us alone. No lawyers, no cameras, no assistants carrying leather folders. Just the three of us. Emily chose a small diner just outside Dayton, a place called Mel's Country Kitchen. It sat beside an old highway where truckers still stopped for coffee before sunrise. The booths were worn smooth from decades of elbows and conversations. Victoria arrived 5 minutes early. I almost didn't recognize her. The expensive cream-colored suits were gone. She wore dark jeans, a navy sweater, and a light jacket. There wasn't a security guard in sight. She looked older, not because of wrinkles, because she looked tired. She spotted us, walked over slowly, and stopped beside the table. "Thank you for coming." Emily nodded toward the empty seat. Victoria sat down. The waitress poured coffee for all three of us, completely unaware she was interrupting one of the strangest family reunions in Ohio. For almost a minute, nobody spoke. Finally, Victoria wrapped both hands around the coffee mug. "I've practiced this conversation 100 times, she said quietly. "And?" "And every version sounded like I was defending myself." Emily didn't answer. Victoria looked at her. "I spent 17 years telling myself a story." "What story?" "That I left because I had no choice." She took a slow breath. There was some truth in that. Daniel's parents hated me after they found out I'd had an affair. They convinced Daniel you couldn't possibly be his daughter. She looked down. "When I left, I told myself I'd come back after things settled down." "But you didn't." "No." "Why?" Victoria closed her eyes. "Because every year it became harder." Silence settled over the table. "I received reports about you," she continued. "At first I only wanted to know if you were alive." "I know. Then I learned you had been placed with Thomas." I stayed quiet. "I told myself you were finally safe." Emily leaned forward. "And that made leaving easier." Victoria nodded. "Yes." She didn't try to soften it. That was the lie I repeated until I believed it. Another pause. "When I saw reports saying Thomas was working overtime, when I saw your school pictures, your grades, I convinced myself that showing up would only confuse you." She looked directly at me. "The truth is, I wasn't protecting Emily. She swallowed. I was protecting myself. Those words hung between us. No excuses followed. No attempt to explain them away. Just the truth. I was terrified, she whispered. Of what? Emily asked. Of seeing the damage I'd done. The waitress returned with breakfast. Nobody touched it. Victoria looked at Emily again. The day Daniel died, I wasn't thinking about money. Emily remained silent. I was thinking about secrets. She shook her head slowly. When the trust attorney started reopening old records, I panicked. She gave a bitter little laugh. My first thought wasn't that I might finally have another chance to know my daughter. She looked ashamed. My first thought was that the entire country might discover what kind of mother I'd been. Emily didn't interrupt. So I tried to control everything. Victoria looked down at her hands. The Ferrari. The agreement. The press. All of it. She met Emily's eyes again. I didn't come back because you needed your mother. A tear rolled down her cheek. I came back because I needed control. She took a shaky breath. I'm sorry. Nothing else. No but. No excuses. No blaming Daniel. No blaming lawyers. Just those two words. Emily watched her for several seconds. Then she spoke. I believe you're sorry. Victoria looked up hopefully. But believing you're sorry isn't the same as pretending nothing happened. The hope faded, replaced by acceptance. I know. Emily folded her hands on the table. If we're going to have any kind of relationship, there have to be rules. Victoria nodded immediately. Anything. You don't show up at Dad's house without asking. I won't. You don't send gifts hoping they'll fix the past. I understand. You don't call him my adoptive father. Victoria glanced at me, then back at Emily. I won't. And you never tell another person that you raised me. Victoria's eyes filled again. I won't. Emily continued. If you lie about what happened one more time, even once, we're done. Victoria didn't hesitate. I accept that. The conversation lasted another hour. Not because everything was solved, because for the first time, nobody was trying to win. Victoria asked about Emily's work. Emily answered politely. Victoria asked about my knee. I told her it still complained louder than I did. She actually smiled. It was a small smile. A human one. When we stood to leave, Victoria reached into her purse. I felt my shoulders tighten. She noticed. Not a gift, she said softly. She placed a folded piece of paper on the table. It was her personal phone number. No assistants. No lawyers. If either of you ever wants to talk, you call me directly. Emily picked it up. She didn't promise anything. Neither did I. Sometimes that's what forgiveness looks like. Not a hug, not tears. Just leaving one door unlocked. A month later, the trustee finalized everything. Emily received exactly what the law said belonged to her. She didn't move into the Langford mansion. She didn't join the family company. She kept working as an engineer. The Ferrari was transferred, auctioned, and turned into scholarships, housing assistance, laptops, and transportation grants for young adults aging out of foster care. Emily paid off the remaining mortgage on my house. I argued for 3 days. I don't need you paying my bills. She smiled. You didn't raise me so I'd owe you. Exactly. You raised me so I'd know how to take care of people. I couldn't think of a good argument after that. One spring morning, nearly a year after graduation, Emily drove me to Indian Lake. There was a used aluminum fishing boat tied to the dock. Not fancy. Not expensive. Just about the right size. She tossed me the keys. You kept your promise, I said. No. She laughed. You kept yours. We spent the afternoon catching almost nothing. It was perfect. Before we drove home, Emily asked me to take one picture. Not beside the boat. Not beside the lake. Beside my old 2005 Ford F-150. She slipped her arm through mine. Smile, Dad. I did. That picture still sits on my fireplace. People sometimes ask why there isn't a photo of the Ferrari, or the Langford estate, or the day Emily inherited enough money to change her life forever. The answer is simple. Those things changed her future. The old Ford reminds us who carried her there. Getting older has taught me something I wish I'd understood sooner. Most parents aren't afraid of growing old because of wrinkles, aching joints, or smaller retirement checks. We're afraid of becoming unnecessary, of waking up one morning and realizing the people we spent our lives loving have simply moved beyond us. Emily taught me something different. If you spend years raising someone with patience, honesty, and unconditional love, they may someday stop needing you to solve every problem. But they'll never stop knowing where home is. Blood can explain where a child begins. It cannot explain who stayed. Victoria gave Emily life. I was lucky enough to share the rest of it. Thank you for listening to my story. If someone in your life proved that family is built by love instead of blood, I'd love to hear about them. Sometimes those stories remind us what really matters.